Hello and welcome to this episode of the Art and Design of Sci-Fi and Fantasy, Mystery and Horror. In this episode I speak with Liz Denlinger, who's a curator of a large collection of Shelley documents, which means she also studies Frankenstein a lot, most of her career, she says. And she's written a book. She's curating a Frankenstein exhibit that's opening in October, and has also written an accompanying book of visuals, Frankenstein visuals through the years, through the centuries, essentially, on Frankenstein. So we talk about all that, a lot of Frankenstein stuff. So thank you and enjoy. I'm speaking with Elizabeth Denlinger, author of It's Alive, A Visual History of Frankenstein. Thank you for speaking with me.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for having me.
So first, tell me, how did you get into studying and writing about Frankenstein?
I came to study British Romanticism through William Blake, and then I ended up writing my doctoral dissertation on Mary Wollstonecraft, who's the mother of Mary Shelley, and I now curate a collection at the New York Public Library called Shelley and His Circle, in full, the Carl H. Forsheimer collection of Shelley and His Circle. And, I joke these days that it should really be Shelley and Her Circle. Mm-hmm. So there's, constant interest from visitors and readers in Frankenstein. And when I was given the chance to curate an exhibition on Frankenstein, which is about to open in October, I jumped on it. So I guess it's sort of like Madge's answer in the old Palmolive ads, where someone says, she says, "You're soaking in it," to the woman who's like softening her fingernails in Palmolive. Mm-hmm. Anyway, I'm soaking in Frankenstein. We're just always in Frankenstein territory here.
Mm-hmm. So the New York Public Library system has it sounds like an enormous collection of Shelley-related documents.
It's about 20,000 books and about 15,000 manuscripts. So it's Shelley. I mean, it's both of the Shelleys, Mary Shelley and Percy Bysshe Shelley, her husband. But it's also their friends and relations and people writing at the same time. So it's pretty broad in terms of what it contains, although it's narrow chronologically. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's big. The biggest Shelley collection is at Oxford, and we were second biggest.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So let's talk about the book. First, I'd like to mention that from what I've seen, just visually, it has just an awesome collection of images, Frankenstein images, and sort of Gothic and creepy images. So that's pretty cool to start with.
Thank you.
Yeah, so tell me about it, how you put it together.
Well, we really wanted to show the art, and especially the Gothic art from which Frankenstein sprang, and of which it's a part. So I didn't realize there was going to be a book, but then I was told, you need to write a book. So I did this fast. But the key to it throughout for me was thinking about what does the monster look like. Because the way that Mary Shelley describes him, which is he has yellow eyes and sort of yellow skin and flowing black hair, and he's enormous. He's 8 feet tall. Was not often the way he was shown on stage or on screen. So that was sort of the thread, but also I wanted to show, as many pictures as possible of, like we're showing the nightmare in the exhibition, and it's also in the book. And it's sort of a starting point for a lot of Gothic art, and it was painted by a Swiss immigrant named Henry Fuseli, who was famous for his scary, spooky paintings. And the nightmare shows a young woman lying on a bed, and this sort of demon is sitting on her. and the actual nightmare is a horse looking through the window, and it's simultaneously spooky and funny. And so Mary Shelley would have had a personal connection to that painting because her mother was in love with Henry Fuseli. In fact, he was the first man she loved. So I always wonder what Mary Shelley must have thought when she saw it, but she almost certainly did. So that was the beginning, and then we wanted to go through, the whole history of, the creature as he appeared on stage in the 1820s when he was painted blue and, danced around because the guy who played him was a famous pantomime artist and very graceful and athletic. He was green in other productions. And then he becomes a sort of less scary sort of gnome or sprite in later illustrations. But then when James Whale puts the 1931 movie on the screen, Boris Karloff is kind of all anybody thinks of when you think of Frankenstein's monster. So we show that, but we also show a bunch of other later Frankensteins as well, including comic book versions.
That's why I was impressed from what I saw. Just the range, the date range, which you cover, is pretty cool. I did notice an interesting chapter. I think it's a romantic childhood or something like that. I'm curious. I don't mind it being included, but I'm curious if you could explain the inclusion of that, because those are very nice pictures of children and a pastoral countryside. So how does that fit in?
It fit in. I agree with you. It's slightly anomalous, and every time I look at the book, I'm like, wait, I forgot we went down the biography route, but we did. Basically I was told, you need to tell Mary Shelley's story. So, the romantic childhood is her childhood. And there's a picture of, her husband, Percy Bysshe Shelley, when he's a child, and his first poem, and the first book that she worked on as well. But you're right. It's a slightly, wonky way to go. Part of the answer is to why this chapter is that, you want to show your best stuff. So part of that was saying, we have the picture of William Shelley, let's show it, and we have the picture of Percy Bysshe Shelley as a boy. So it was a little, what's the word, opportunistic, possibly. You could say that. Well,
it's a pleasure to see.
We also thought it would enrich people's understanding of the novel and the whole thing if they knew what sort of person had created Frankenstein.
So what sort of, you mentioned one piece of art that Mary Shelley would have been exposed to. Do you have an idea of what other type of horror or Gothic imagery she would have been exposed to prior to writing Frankenstein?
Well, she was living at a moment when Gothic novels were hugely popular, and she almost certainly would have read plenty of those on her own. And in fact, her husband, Percy Bysshe Shelley, wrote two when he was a teenager. So we know that she would have read things like The Monk and The Castle of Otranto by Mrs. Radcliffe. And we know actually that she spent an evening with Byron and Matthew Lewis, who wrote The Monk, in which Lewis told them 5 ghost stories, and she wrote them all down very carefully in her journal. And she would have known, she also would have known vampire stories, which weren't as popular then as they are now, but they were beginning to be put on stage in one of the, during the famous ghost story contest, which Byron proposed to Shelley, both the Shelleys and his doctor John Polidori in Geneva. Polidori wrote a vampire story that was in fact based on his experience with Byron. But so she would have known about vampires as well as ghosts, and the sort of haunted nuns and the malicious monks. They didn't have zombies or werewolves, which is odd because they could. There's no reason not to have had werewolves, but they just weren't as significant in popular culture at the time as they became later.
Interesting. Could you discuss a few of the images that you have in the book that maybe you particularly like or you find noteworthy for some special reason?
Sure. One of my favorite ones is a picture. I'm just trying to turn to it now. Picture by a man named Philippe de Loutherbourg, who was besides being a painter, he was a set designer, and he made these fantastic sets with special effects, and people loved them. They just loved them. But the painting that we've got shows a young philosopher with long hair, and it's sort of windswept, and he's standing in front of an open grave, holding a book in his hand, and he has this imploring look on his face. And in fact, it's Tintern Abbey, which we now think of, when you think of Tintern Abbey, you think of Wordsworth's poem. But the de Loutherbourg painting, it's just almost campy, but not quite, and it has that sort of blue-gray, moonlit color scheme that I think of as particularly Gothic, like that plus blood red are like the Gothic colors, to my mind. So yeah, I was really happy we were able to include that. We've got this print called, unexcitingly, Interior of a Gothic Crypt, but it shows these tourists visiting the tomb of a dead knight, and their guide is holding this torch, and then there's a candelabra over the tomb, and it's made so that when you hold it up to a light, the red torch and the red candelabra glow because they're like coated with wax. So the light shines through and they light up, and it's super cool.
Yeah.
In this low-tech way.
Is there a specific, with all these images you looked at, is there a specific visual element or elements that always pop up in these images? Some kind of thread that without it wouldn't be a Frankenstein, apart from Frankenstein actually being in the image,
That it would be Frankenstein or it would be Gothic? Because I think for Gothic art, like there's always a relation to death. And with Frankenstein, really there aren't that many illustrated editions of Frankenstein, and the monster is always the most important element of any illustrated edition. And I guess the one thing he always has is bigness. He's always big and he's always scary, and he's not always ugly. Like Mary Shelley describes him as, inhumanly ugly to Victor Frankenstein, but other artists have drawn him in a whole lot of different ways.
The gnomish image you said of him. Now, does that still have a quality of bigness to it, or are you saying
that one? Actually, I take it back. That one doesn't. It's from a really cheap 1860s, like a penny dreadful version. Like it was a penny newspaper where this guy named Dick was reprinting famous novels, and that were out of copyright. I mean, there wasn't really copyright, but novels that he didn't have to pay the author for the rights to. And that one really is actually not huge. Mm-hmm. And it's completely unfrightening.
So...
it looks like a brownie, like in the Scottish gnome sort of figure.
Interesting.
So I take it back. It's always big, except when it isn't.
Well, I don't want to have that one anomaly mess up what you see as a pretty common element in the visualization, because I wanted to break it down. What do you really need for it to be Frankenstein? Like you say, it's people have different variations, and I'm thinking of the hair. For some reason, the dark hair always seems to be there, and it makes me wonder. I always wonder about good and evil. People show blonde and black hair, and I could never imagine a blonde Frankenstein. He would no longer look evil. I think it has to be dark and mysterious.
It's true. Although in the Rocky Horror Picture Show, the creature that Frankenfurter makes is, remember that's Rocky? Mm-hmm. And he's like blonde and beautiful and he looks like Tarzan. Yeah. But you're right. And I think there's a really, there's an element of racism to it. Mm-hmm. The creature is always a person of color. And different illustrators or, different movie directors or, whoever is interpreting the creature visually, they do different things with that. But, like, when he was first put on stage, they painted the creature blue, like blue-gray, and he wore a blue-gray bodysuit, but they also painted his skin, and he wore a toga. Mm-hmm. And when Mary Shelley writes him, he's yellow. But there's this woman named Elizabeth Young wrote a whole book called Black Frankenstein, about how there's this slippage between seeing black men, not women, but really black men, as monstrous, and therefore the monster as a black man. Mm-hmm. And if you look at the scene in the 1931 Frankenstein, and I think again in the Bride of Frankenstein in 1935, when the villagers are chasing the monster, it's like a lynch scene. Mm-hmm. So that's another element, is he's always, in some way not Caucasian. Mm-hmm.
It seemed like the bodies that were used, it's always like poor, swarthy Mediterranean types, or someone from the South, not a Northerner, so to speak, if that makes sense.
Well, Mary Shelley doesn't actually say anything about where Victor gets the bodies, except that he's in Germany. He's in Ingolstadt when he makes the creature, so presumably the creature has to be German. Mm-hmm. But he is often pictured as
I'm not sure where I got that, but that's sort of the sense I always had, that he was, basically just, a darker person than your standard blonde Germanic type.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I was just thinking about his hair, and in the 1931 movie, he hardly has any. Well, he's got like bangs, and they're black, but it's because they made his head, like the makeup artist Jack Pierce imagined his head as having been opened to put the brain in. So it's flat. So you just don't see much hair.
Okay.
He's a jar head. Yeah.
Let me ask you then about the resources you used to do the research. Obviously, you pulled. Where did you find all the images, and are all the backup, the reference documents, are they pulled from this from the collection that you curate?
Some of them are, but we also traveled a fair amount to do research. So we went to the Lewis Walpole Library, which is the library of 18th century books and prints, and looked through their print collections. We went to the Yale Center for British Art and got a bunch of great stuff there. Mm-hmm. We went to the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences and borrowed some fantastic movie posters, which are, they're in the book. Where else? We borrowed some stuff from the City Museum of Geneva. We borrowed some things from England. And the Henry Fuseli's Nightmare we were borrowed from the Detroit Institute of Art. So we didn't travel to all of those places, but Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences and Yale Center for British Art were sort of the two biggest ones. And we also went to, New York Public Library has a library for the performing arts, and we got a bunch of stuff from there as well.
Did you, when you were doing the research, did you find stuff in your own collection that you curate that maybe you had forgotten about or just didn't realize was there that added to this research?
I wish I could say yes, but the truth is we show the Frankenstein stuff so often that that I was just like, this, and this, they're all going in. And then we bought some stuff. Like, I actually bought some comic books that we didn't have before to put in. And my co-curator actually started collecting Frankenstein comic books. So it's not so much that we found stuff we didn't know we had, but we bought new stuff for the occasion.
What part of the research was most enjoyable for you?
It's really all fun, but going to other libraries and being the researcher instead of the librarian it's really fun. I have to say, just like looking through catalogs and writing out slips and seeing the stuff when it arrives it's just really great. It's like being on a treasure hunt, and it's the kind of treasure hunt where you're going to find stuff, and you do, and then you have to think about how to use it and what it means and how to talk about it, and it really is an extremely rewarding way to spend your time, and I'm grateful to have had this opportunity.
Was there, which of the sites that you went to was the most fun to search through or work with?
Wow. Kind of a tie, I'd say, between the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences and the Lewis Walpole Library, I think. And the Yale Center for British Art was pretty great, too.
Well, you don't
in some ways... Pardon?
You don't have to choose.
I know. Those three. Which were the main three. And I also got to see, there was a terrific Frankenstein exhibition in Geneva that I was able to spend some time with. And that was also enormously helpful and pretty great.
It must be fun to get paid to go to these places and just search for Frankenstein-related stuff.
It is. Yeah, no, it is. I mean, then the writing the book part is, like, that is real slogging work. And the way the time scale worked, it ended up, I was just, like, writing 7 days a week last summer. But yeah, no, the actual traveling and the looking at stuff is, it is fun. There's that about it.
Was there something you found that was particularly surprising in the research you did?
I think I didn't realize quite how deeply Gothic art pervaded England in the early 19th century. It's everywhere. And people just loved spooky stuff just as much as they do now. And I don't think I quite appreciated that when I started. And I think I also didn't quite realize how much, I should say that there's also going to be scientific equipment in the exhibition, and there's stuff in the book as well. And I think I didn't realize how much people studied science. I mean, just as a sort of popular pastime, studying science and doing these experiments where you knew exactly what was going to happen, but you still wanted to see, the sparks or the bird dying or the bird not dying. And people from the middle classes upward really just looked at scientific stuff with great interest throughout this period.
So you make me think or wonder about when you say Gothic was really popular in the early 19th century. What about as compared to the U.S.? And I'm thinking of stuff like Sleepy Hollow, and of course there's Poe.
They're a little bit later. I mean, it's absolutely the same kind of impulse. They're just a teeny bit later. I'm trying to remember when Washington Irving is writing, but it's the 1820s, 30s. And Poe is also just a teeny bit later.
Were you able to identify, or do you know what kicked off British interest in the Gothic? And I'm thinking in terms of some societal effect, not necessarily a particular, novel or writing or.
In some ways, one of the things that made it popular was the fears aroused by the American and French revolutions. The French Revolution especially, I mean, after 1793 or so, Britain was living either in constant fear of French invasion and in a state of war with France until 1815. And just the thing about the Gothic is that it lets you deal with death in a pretty deep way, but also lets you sort of get away from it by the end of the story. You put down the story and you say, that isn't true, it will never happen, then I don't have to worry about it. But it also lets you wonder, okay, well, maybe not Frankenstein, but what about ghosts? And this was a period of history when mortality was just a bigger part of normal life than it is now. And also, I should say, when grave robbers were, it's a time when there's more study of science, there's more study of anatomy by medical students, but the provision of bodies was, the company of surgeons was allowed, I think, 18 bodies a year until the 1760s, I think. But they needed many more, so there really were grave robbers working all the time, stealing newly buried bodies. Both of those things were part of the reason for the popularity, I think.
What was the most difficult thing to research? Maybe to come to a conclusion on some question, or maybe you're still grappling with?
I think the nature of Frankenstein's monster is still a subject that is sort of interesting in a way that I can't ever come to a conclusion about entirely. He's monstrous because he's made from dead bodies, but he's fascinating. In the novel, he's got this incredibly powerful moral voice. So he argues with Frankenstein about why he should have him made and why he deserves better treatment than he's received. So I find him an endlessly interesting character.
Mm-hmm. Would you, if people considered Frankenstein as sort of an argument of man with God, if you could actually, debate him about that sort of stuff?
People made it into that. I mean, sort of as soon as it went on the stage, it became... when it went on stage, the title was changed to Presumption, ! Or The Fate of Frankenstein. And, the sort of idea that Frankenstein dares to do what God did, which comes up again explicitly in the movie, people have used it. It's not really that strong in the novel. I mean, what's interesting about the novel is that, Mary Shelley was raised in this not particularly religious household, and amongst a lot of free thinkers and Unitarians, and so she's not, and the guy she marries is explicitly an atheist. So she's not writing Frankenstein in theological terms at all. But as soon as it goes onto the stage, it's made into this sort of idea that it's an argument against God, or that it's somehow an act of impiety to make the creature. And I think that's a part of the Frankenstein myth that I'm sort of least interested in.
But it's
because it's just so easy to be pat and be like, oh no, it's bad, and Frankenfoods are bad, and messing with genetics is bad. It's just so wildly oversimplified that I find it frustrating.
Okay. Was there anything you discovered in your research that emotionally moved you, either positively or negatively?
I'm always surprised that I continue to find it interesting, in a sort of general sense. I've been working with Frankenstein for most of my professional life, and at the beginning I was like, oh, another Frankenstein thing, and then it's still interesting. It's really a very powerful book. And I continue to find the creature very moving and, a very touching character.
Yeah. So what do you hope, apart from just showing images of Frankenstein, what do you hope the book will do for readers?
I hope it'll make people think about monstrosity and about how it is that we think of other people as monstrous, how it is that we think of ourselves as monstrous, and how it is that, even a well-brought-up young woman can imagine monsters. I think there's a sort of endlessly energizing tension between thinking about Mary Shelley, the well-raised young woman, and what she thought up.
Okay. Can you speak to any... You mentioned that you were sort of instructed to write the book, so there wouldn't be any problems getting it published because it was asked for, but did you have any difficulties finishing the book?
No, not really. I was just under the gun so much that I was like, okay, I have planned out the chapters, I know what I'm going to do. It was hard work all the way through, but I had to do it, so there was sort of no question about it. So it wasn't hard to finish. The hardest part was retelling the story of Mary Shelley's childhood because I'd done it so many times. But yeah, no, it was actually it was fun doing all the stuff that was new to me. Was just really exciting.
Mm-hmm. And the exhibition opens October 12th, correct?
Yes.
And you were working on that as well while writing the book, or was there some overlap, or was it separate?
There's a lot of overlap. I mean, almost all of the images that you see in the book are things that are going to be in the exhibition.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it was complete overlap, and basically first we planned the exhibition, then I wrote the book while the planning continued, and then I wrote the labels for the exhibition, and then by that point I was like, yay, I wrote this book, so that means I can use the book for the labels.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a fair amount of self-cannibalizing for the labels of the exhibition.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And then, it was a very they fed each other mutually.
So where exactly is the exhibition going to be?
It's going to be at the Morgan, which is the Morgan Library and Museum, and that's in New York, mm-hmm. on Madison between 36th and 37th.
Mm-hmm. How many square feet is the exhibit?
Oh my God, I should know the answer to that question. I have no idea. I can tell you it's 2 galleries. Like most of their shows are 1 gallery, and this is 2. Mm-hmm. So there's one big room devoted to Mary Shelley's childhood and the novel, and sort of the earlier part. And the other room is devoted to the stage productions and the movie productions. Mm-hmm. So we've got. Like the scariest thing I have to say is we have the torso model for Robert De Niro's makeup in Kenneth Branagh's film, mm-hmm. And it's just terrifying and gross. I mean,
That's interesting.
It was an actual model of the monster with all these sutures and this absolutely agonized look on his face.
Mm-hmm.
So there's lots of just some really wonderful things. There's the biggest surviving Frankenstein poster from the 1931 show that's a half billboard big. Mm-hmm. I think it's never been shown anywhere in public before.
Oh wow, that's cool.
Yeah.
Did you come across many lobby cards for the movies?
We are showing lobby cards, and we didn't come across a huge number, but there were some at the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, and a private collector has also who collects movie posters and movie memorabilia is also lending some lobby cards.
Mm-hmm. I found out recently, I was surprised to learn this, that the images on lobby cards did not get copyright protection. So those, actually, people can use those lobby card images in however they want.
I don't think I knew that.
Yeah. I spoke to someone else about another book, and they found that out, and they were happy that they didn't need permission for some of those images.
I bet.
So do you have another writing project coming up? Or what's your next project?
I may be going on to do an exhibition either here or at Keith's house in Rome, Keith Shelley House, for the 200th anniversary of the death of Shelley, P.B. Shelley, the poet, and Keith, John Keith. Mm-hmm. So Keith died in 1821 and Shelley died in 1822. Mm-hmm. So that might be next up.
Okay. So where can people find... do you have a social media presence? Do you write other stuff on the side, or anything like that?
I should, but I don't. I mean, I'm on Facebook. Mm-hmm. I mean, not in a totally public way, but I don't. I mean, there's some blogs on the New York Public Library's website, and my colleague is better at blogging than I am, or churning them out. but I mostly don't, alas.
Okay. Well, what's the New York Public Library's website so people can check out the exhibition online or information?
Well, it's actually on the Morgan's website. And you just, if you Google "It's Alive Morgan," you will get there very fast. Okay.
All right. That's all the questions I have. Do you have any final words or thoughts?
The monster is completely unkillable. That's one of the things I learned from doing this.
Despite the best efforts of the lynch mobs.
Exactly.
That's cool. All right. Well, thank you for speaking with me.
Well, you're welcome. Thank you for asking me.
Thank you for listening. One of the best ways in which you can provide feedback for this podcast is to rate me on iTunes. Please give me a good rating if you like this, or feel free to give me a bad rating if you didn't, and I'll use that feedback to hopefully make this a better podcast. You can also follow me on Instagram under Chris Alvarez Sci-Fi, on Facebook under Chris Alvarez WLC, on YouTube under Chris Alvarez WLC, and on Twitter under Chris Alvarez WLC. You can also get more information on my website, chrisalvarez.com. Please remember my name Chris does not have an H, so it's ChrisAlvarez.com. Thanks for listening, and keep imagining the future.